Welcome to the Unschooling Lifestyle Podcast, and join us as we explore various aspects of unschooling, including practical tips for parents, real life stories and experiences from unschooling families, discussions on the philosophy behind unschooling, and the benefits and challenges of this alternative but revolutionary approach to education. We also traverse on topics like self directed learning, holistic development, and creating a nurturing environment that emphasizes a collaborative and respectful relationship between parents and children, fostering a deep connection and understanding of each other. Let's get started. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Peter Gray, a research professor at Boston College, specializing in psychology and neuroscience. His work explores children's natural learning processes and the importance of play from an evolutionary standpoint. In our conversation, he shares actionable insights on how we can incorporate more play into our lives. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unschooling Lifestyle. Today we have Dr. Peter Gray with us. He's the author of the very famous book, Free to Learn, that was published back in 2013. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Gray. How are you today?
I'm good, and thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I appreciate you so much. I just, your book was published in 2013, and I was struggling with my own life back then, but my son was born in 2014. And then fast forward to 2021, I was struggling with the pandemic and the schooling and all of this stuff. And I did traditional homeschooling. And then there was a switch. But your book was very pivotal in our journey because it reminded me of play. And I'm just wondering, why have we forgotten about play? Naturally, like I feel like adults, parents, and schools forget about play.
Well, it's an interesting question. This is something I've written quite a lot about and looked into quite a lot about. We have, over decades, really over about 70 years, we have been gradually reducing children's opportunities to play, and it's been gradual. So we didn't just suddenly take children's opportunities to play away. So from one year to the next, it doesn't seem that different, but over time, it's been a huge change. It's been there's no comparison between the amount of opportunities that children had to play when I was a kid back in the 1950s and for kids today. Some of the things that have led to the decline of play are an increase in the degree to which parents are fearful about letting their children outdoors, letting them, most play used to occur outdoors away from parents. Parents would kick their kids outdoors. I don't want you in the house. Get out of the house. And there were a lot of kids in the 1950s, and so you'd go out and there'd be other kids also kicked out of their house, and so there would be lots of kids to play with. This was very common. And of course, they weren't always kicked out. They were glad to be out for the most part, to be playing with other kids. So that changed. Gradually, the change accelerated on that score in the 1980s. There was a couple of cases near the beginning of 1980 in the United States of young boys who were kidnapped and ultimately murdered by strangers when they were outside playing. And this is an extraordinarily rare event. Almost never happens, but it did happen twice, once in 1979, once in 1981. And partly because it's rare, it made headlines. And so everybody began to believe this is a very common thing. And parents would be negligent to allow their children outdoors without some adult there monitoring them and supervising them. So that was one of the changes. There's also been a gradual incremental increase in the amount of time children have to spend in school and the amount of time they spend at homework after school. The school year has increased by about 5 weeks over the course since the 1950s in the United States on average. Homework, which used to not really be present at all in elementary school, or very little at all, and now common even the kindergartners,
Mm-hmm.
are bringing home homework. So kids are not done with school even when they're home. There has been partly because of parents being afraid for kids to just go out and play on their own, but partly for other reasons. There's been an increase in adult-directed after-school activities, including adult-directed
Mm-hmm.
sports, which are not play. Play is activity that's initiated and controlled by the players themselves, not something that's organized by some authority figure such as a coach. So, and these are more school-like activities, adult-directed activities, even when school isn't in session. So I think over time, those are just some of the reasons. Over time, people began to believe that number one, it's dangerous for kids to be playing on their own,
Mm-hmm.
and number two, it's really important that kids do a lot of schoolwork and school-like stuff. That this is People began to believe that this is more important for children's development than their own self-initiated activities. Of course, my thesis in Free to Learn
Mm-hmm.
is that children's own self-directed activities are extraordinarily important for their development. Those are the activities in which they really acquire the difficult things to learn, which in the end are much more important for adult success than the kind of narrow academic lessons that are taught in school.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What I really loved about your so
Okay.
what was important for me from your book was to see that you said that geniuses were the people that carry those themes and that children have, like language and the play, and all of that. They carry that into adulthood. But like you said about language, it's called poetry once they carry that. So it's so interesting how people don't see that in children, but yet we praise that in adults later on, like, and we encourage adults, and how hard it is for us adults to go back into childhood or into play for ourselves. And that was honestly the hardest thing for me as a parent when I started this journey, to kind of like go back to it, because I forgot what it was to play. The very last chapter of your book, you
Okay.
talk about the future of schools, what you think it would be like.
Well, it's interesting. I think we are in some ways beginning to change as a culture. COVID, I mean, of course, this occurred
Mhm.
well after I wrote my book, but
Yeah.
COVID played a role in that, as you know from your own
Hmm.
experience. I think what happened there is a lot of families, some families for the first time saw what was going on in school because when school
Hmm.
was being done through the internet, and parents were supposed to be sitting there watching it. A lot of parents thought, "Oh my God, why is that important?" or "Why?" or "I could do better than that as a
Yes.
teacher." And so it encouraged a lot of people to homeschool who hadn't really felt that they would be able to before, and also and many there was a huge increase in homeschoolers
Hmm.
during COVID, and many of them stayed with it after
Hmm.
COVID, as you well know, and some of those gradually merged into unschooling after.
Yes.
The usual route to unschooling is to first do homeschooling and then to realize, wait a minute, I don't want to fight with my kid to make my kid read this book when they're just as interested in that other book or that other
Hmm.
thing. Why not let them follow what that seems just as important, just as interesting as what the school curriculum would be or this homeschool curriculum would be. And so it kind of, homeschooling is the gateway to unschooling, really.
Yes.
And so that's happening. I think today, today even more so than in 2013. I really feel like now is the time when self-directed education, whether it's through homeschooling or through schools like the Sudbury Valley School that I
Hmm.
studied, or learning centers like Agile Learning Centers, which are designed for self-directed education, I think the time is ripe for that for a number of reasons. One is that schools have become increasingly toxic and increasingly obviously toxic. Common Core has changed the nature of schooling in ways that makes it far more stressful than it was before. The high stakes testing, the narrowing of the curriculum to what is generally the most boring and stressful stuff for kids, taking away recess, reducing lunch hours, all of these things that have resulted, more and more parents are realizing that this is not healthy for their kids, and the kids are getting angry and anxious about school, and parents are wanting to do something about that. So I think that's part of it. Another part of it is that as time goes on and more people are doing it, it becomes less weird to do it. It becomes less odd to do it.
Oh my God, yes.
It's easier to justify it. If you're the only person in your community doing it, everybody kind of looks askance at you. What are you doing this goofy thing for? Are you trying to ruin your child? Even your own parents, the child's grandparents might complain that that what are you doing? You're ruining the future of my grandchild by not sending them to school. And this has been always the biggest roadblock to especially unschooling, is the fear of how other people, even people who figured out this would be the best thing for my child, are very reluctant to do it, more so in the past than now, because of the criticisms that they would expect to get. And as more and more people do it, it's easier to point, well, there are other people doing this, and some of them have been doing it a long time, and there's actually research showing that people can do this and go on to very successful lives, and they can even go on to higher education after this. So what I'm doing is not such a terrible thing after all. So that becomes easier. Another point is as the internet has come about, and as more and more of us are familiar and comfortable with the internet, this really changes the conditions for education. The whole world's knowledge is available right there at your thumb tips,
Yeah.
And kids know this. And you don't have to go to some institution in order to make contact with knowledge or to learn. You can learn anything you want.
Anything. Yes.
At whatever rate you want, and from whoever you would like to learn it on the internet. You can find discussion groups on every topic under the sun on the internet. So the internet has really changed the possibilities for education. If you're homeschooling or unschooling, you don't have to feel like, oh my God, I can't do it because I don't know very much. It doesn't matter if you know very much. Your kid can find answers to whatever questions they have. They can, if they want to take courses, there are courses on the internet. You can take any course at Harvard free on the internet. Many people don't realize this. So this is remarkable. And the other thing that's occurred is that people have come to understand also that the economy has changed over time. So we used to be a world in which most people made their living as factory workers or in some kind of a routine job, or even if it was not a blue-collar job, it was they might be accountants, and they got their job because they were good at counting, good at math and calculations and so on and so forth. Well, the thing is, all those kinds of jobs have been taken over by computers. I mean, robots, computers, now AI can do all these boring routine things. We don't need people to do that. We don't need people to memorize a lot of information. You can find the answer to any question you want very quickly on the internet. You can find multiple answers, and then the question is which one is right. But that's a matter of critical thinking, not a matter of, so that's a matter of, so at any rate, the economy has changed such that what the world needs, the kinds of jobs that are available, are for people who are innovative, who are creative, who have good social skills, who have moral values. These are the things that are not developed in school. These are almost suppressed in school. These are the things that children develop when they're free to pursue their own interests. So in many ways, children in self-directed education, whether it's unschooling or through institution for self-directed education are preparing themselves for the modern economy much better than our children in schools that are learning all these old skills like memorizing a lot of information, being able to do calculations that you can easily do on your computer, memorizing how to solve quadratic equations when nobody ever uses a quadratic equation, ever.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So all of this stuff that's kind of wasted time in school turns out not to be useful, and more companies are beginning to recognize that. And they're more and more interested in people who have developed, who have a passion for the job and who have developed on their own the kind of skills that are required for the job. And those are not the kinds of skills that are taught in school.
That is remarkable. I remember when we first transitioned, my son, we had to go through this like deconditioning that learning was part of the classroom, that happened just in the classroom. And I had to relearn to know my son, to see my son as a person versus just this individual tiny human that I had to, get up in the morning, take to school and bring him back and feed him and kind of get to do it all over again. Like I had to, he was like 6 going on 7. And we had to relearn to get to know each other. And like you say, our bond was there, but it was very fragile. And as we spend time together and we open ourselves, for me to share what I like with him and for him to share what he liked, we reconnected, But what he liked was also technology and the, gaming. Our kids are going to be doing jobs that perhaps have not been created yet. And I know, you have written about technology and the fear of screens in children, right? Could you say a little bit about what you have done so far?
So the fear of games, you said? The fear, yes, right. Well, so, we went through a period of time. Thankfully, this is declining a little bit. Where people were really demonizing video games. It was as if video games were the root of all evil. I mean, I once, some years ago, I Googled harmful effects of video games, and I wrote a list of all the claims about the harmful effects of video games, and I concluded tongue-in-cheek that if you believe the messages on the internet, video games are the cause of all the maladies of adolescence, except possibly for acne. They cause violence, they cause ADHD, they cause obesity, they cause loneliness, and so on and so on and so forth. So then after reading all that, I said, so where do people get these ideas from? Is there actually research on the effects of video games? And it turns out there is a lot of research on the effects of video games. And sometimes the intention of the research was to find negative effects, but what they found was positive effects. So,
oh, wow.
For example, there was one study, it was very clear they wanted to show that kids who played video games had fewer friends and were more lonely and isolated than kids who didn't play video games. They found the exact opposite. The ones who played video games had more friends, were more socially competent. There was a huge study done, directed by the Columbia University School of Mental Health, along with some universities in Europe, a worldwide study that showed that, and this was with young children between the ages of 6 and 10, that those who played video games at least 5 hours a week scored higher on every single assessment that was used in that study than those who played less. They had higher social skills. They were more they were happier. They suffered less from anxiety, depression. They even performed better in school than those who played less. And my conclusion from that is that's because kind of in this day and age, and even when that study was done, kids who aren't playing video games probably are not playing at all.
Yes.
And play does all these things, including video game play. So, the more I looked into it, there's evidence that video games are a good treatment for ADHD. They help
Mm-hmm.
reduce ADHD. They teach you how to pay attention and be persistent and so on and so forth. You have to pay attention and be persistent to
Totally.
succeed as you go from step to step. There's also research, if people are interested in IQ, there's research showing there's nothing that builds IQ more than video games do. And it's not surprising to me that that's the case. I hate video games because I find them too difficult. I find them too
Same.
cognitively difficult. My mind doesn't work that fast, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that good at it. But there are all these skills that are being built of being able to attend to what's relevant and what's not relevant, being able
Yeah.
to make quick and accurate decisions,
Mm-hmm.
being able to change your strategy when the game changes. All of these kinds of things are the very kinds of skills that are assessed in IQ tests. And there are controlled studies showing that playing video games improves performance on these skills for children and for adults. And there's now recommendation that people like me who are on in age ought to be playing video games to protect ourselves from mental decline as we get older. So there's just the research on video games is really quite striking. Now, it
Yes.
is the case that sometimes people, if we have a world where children are not easily able to go outdoors and play, and even if they do outdoors, there aren't many other kids to play with.
Mm-hmm.
Then the unfortunate thing is maybe sometimes the only way they can play is with video games.
Yeah.
The only way they can play is indoors, and I don't think that's completely healthy. I think it's a good thing to also balance that indoor play with
Mm-hmm.
outdoor play. But I don't blame video games for that. I blame the fact that we have become a world where we prevent children from just going out
Yes.
and finding other children to play with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that, yeah, we play video games, but I find the boys now, they are bringing those, like my son plays survival games, so there's a lot of like building, there's a lot of like thinking what resources do you need to make, perhaps something to eat or how to find your food. And I find those skills translate, when we're outside. We garden a lot, so when we're outside, how can this plant be better? Does it need more sun? Does it need less sun? How can we use it to do something else other than just being outside? So I find those skills translated, but it took a while actually. I was fearful. I mean, I can say I was a parent that would take the screen away, and I would be like, we are not doing the screen. We are, and I was, like you said, I was fearful of it. But
Uh-huh.
it took a while, and it took time to trust myself and my son, and to prioritize a relationship versus, just my fears over something that was completely unfounded, or at least for us, right? It was unfounded for us. But do you have any, I know, do you have any comments for parents, to manage the fear, or to like go through it and just like kind of like come out on the other side?
That's a good question. I do think that actually looking at the research literature or reading the summaries of the literature would help because all these fears that are being presented, really, when you really look at the research, they're not supported. So simply knowing the research as opposed to, what the popular view is
Mm-hmm.
helpful. So the other thing I suppose is parents might want to try playing the games and develop a better appreciation of them, or talk to your kids. Hey, what games are you playing? What do you like about that
Mm-hmm.
game? Instead of demonizing it, try to understand it. Now, if your child says, "Yeah, I really don't want to talk to you about it," that's up to your child. You shouldn't force a conversation. But maybe
Correct.
your child
Yes.
would be interested in discussing it and showing you about the game and what they think they get out of the game. There are research studies done some time ago that are really where they get gamers together in groups to talk about why they play the games, what they get out of the
Mm-hmm.
games, and what those studies have shown is that the kids themselves seem to understand that what they get from the games are those kinds of psychological experiences that we know are very important for healthy development.
Mm-hmm.
They gain a sense of competence. The games are difficult, and they're structured in
Very.
a way that you go from one level to the next. And so you sense this, I achieved this very difficult thing as I went from one level to the next. These are not easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the games that are most valued are the difficult games, not the easy games. So
Yes.
the sense of competence, the sense I can do this difficult thing. There's also another basic need is the sense of autonomy. I've
Mm-hmm.
chosen to play this game, and within the game, there are a lot of choices to be made. The game is not so structured that it is always telling me what I have to do. I have to figure out what to do, and there's various
Mm-hmm.
things I can do, and there's various routes to take in this game. So this idea of autonomy, of choices, of freedom, this is very important for people to have this sense of being
Mm-hmm.
able to do what they choose to do and to be creative in what they do. And the games really augment creativity because like many other forms of play, more so than some forms of play, you
Mm-hmm.
have to be creative to play these games, most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And then finally, once the games became multiplayer online games, they're social. You're interacting with other
Mm-hmm.
people, both
Mm-hmm.
in game and out of game. The interactions are not always what parents would treasure,
Yeah.
but they're interactions. And the truth of the matter is, kids aren't always nice to one another, and that's
True.
important in development too, to understand that how do you deal with people who aren't being nice to me. That's part of
Mm-hmm.
it. But for the most part, they are cooperative online, and they're figuring things out together, and they're solving
Together.
problems. So these basic needs of competence, autonomy, and relationships, sort of the
Mm-hmm.
sense of relating to other people, are seem to be what make video games so attractive to kids. And this is what makes any kind of social play attractive to kids.
Yes, without a doubt. It was hard for me to definitely to sit down and to ask questions about the games because, like I said, I'm not a gamer. I grew up in Mexico, and back then we had the Nintendo, like
Yes.
the early version of Nintendo, and we didn't have money to buy. My parents didn't buy it for us because we didn't have money for it. So I didn't grow up with, with some sort of, gaming. But
Right.
as of now, the games that they practice, they're quite difficult, and they take a lot of
Right.
pride when they pass the certain levels and whatnot. But they also choose to take breaks, on their own time. They're like, I'm going to take a break from it because this level is difficult, and I'm going to come back to it. I may do some research and then I'll come back to it. But it is really a freedom of choice at that point. I couldn't force if they wanted to. It's definitely a freedom of choice. And as of now, what are you concentrating on? Your work. Actually, recently, I live in Michigan, and there was an article on the news about unschooling, and they interview a few moms, one from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and another one from Grand Rapids. But in the piece, there were snapshots of your book, and there was another a little picture of John Taylor Gatto's book as well. So your work is very foundational to this movement for us to get to know and to value play. What are you working on?
Well, so I'm involved in a number of projects. I have just recently signed a contract for a new book, which
Okay.
the working title of it is Restoring Childhood. I'm not sure if that'll be the final title, but I really talk about what it means to be a child, how
Mm-hmm.
Mother Nature, which is my term for natural selection, has designed children to be in a certain way for good reasons, to
Mm-hmm.
play, to explore, to rebel in some ways, to be willful, to, all these things that have characterized childhood since the beginning of time. We are more or less suppressing those things, and
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to get channel children into behaving just the way we want them to behave and do the things we want. And my argument is that this is really why we have such high rates of anxiety, depression, and even suicide among school-age children and teens. And if we want to solve this problem, we've got to recognize what childhood is and allow children to behave as children, which will sometimes be annoying, but this has always been the case, right? And so sometimes it won't fit with what we adults think they should be doing, but we have to accept that. And many times and the result is we'll have happier kids. We'll have kids who grow up with more social skills, more creativity, and so on and so forth. So that's the book that I'm working on right now. I'm also involved in a number of projects. We're working with regular public schools through an organization called Let Grow, an organization that was founded by Lenore Skenazy and me and a couple of other people to bring more play and independent adventures to children's lives. And one of the ways we're working in Let Grow is with schools. And one thing that was kind of my invention or my development is something that's called Play Club, which is an hour of free play. I wish it was during the school hours, but most schools make it either before school or after school. Age mixed play, where all the kids in all the grades from kindergarten through fifth grade, if it's an elementary school, are all playing together. And the only rule is don't hurt anybody. And the teachers who monitor it are told not to intervene unless there's a really immediate emergency, that they should act like they're lifeguards on a beach. They're there to save a life, not to tell the kids how to play better or to solve little quarrels or to worry if somebody skins a knee or anything like that. Let the kids solve their own problems. That's the whole point of play. And quite a number of schools have adopted this, and it's been very successful where it's been adopted. So that's another currently. I designed a research study that is being carried out currently in the state of New Hampshire, where some schools have adopted this, others have not, in an experimental-like way. And I'm not on the ground doing the research, but what the researchers are doing is collecting data to look at what are the consequences for the kids and for the school who are in this program compared to those who are not. So that's another thing I'm involved in. Another project is what I've called the Pediatric Initiative. I've become convinced that that most parents get their information, the trusted information about what to do with their kids for the kids' health, including mental health, from their pediatricians. And pediatricians are, in my mind, often over-concerned with safety and not sufficiently concerned with children's needs for play and adventure, even if it's somewhat risky. And so we're trying to educate pediatricians about this. And we have actually created a little flyer to send out to pediatricians, which they can then, in turn, give to the parents of the children that they're seeing about the importance of independent play and independent adventures. We're even planning, we haven't done this yet, planning to create little play prescription pads where the pediatrician writes out a prescription to the child to play at something that the child has already said they would like to do, or to engage in some adventure that the child would like to do. So those are some of the things that I'm involved in right now.
That is so interesting. I really love the piece about the pediatrics, because when I first, I took all the information with my first son. With my second one, maybe not so much, because I felt like I had like a little bit of experience, obviously different children, but both my first one, like whatever the pediatrician said, like I did. Like I was not doubting. And then after that, a few things happened, and it made me, we worked together, but I remember being, feeling, my oldest son had surgery at 2 or 3 weeks. He was 3 weeks old. He had, pyloric stenosis, and it's just a little muscle in the stomach that didn't fully develop. So he had surgery, but I remember talking to the pediatrician, and she was saying something, and I'm like, no, this isn't. But I remember feeling very anxious almost of going against what she was saying, that she was thinking that it wasn't anything like really bad, that it was just like normal. And I'm like, no, this isn't, I was really going against my instinct, that I knew that something
Uh-huh.
was happening. And I feel like as parents, we feel that instinct, we feel it in our core, and we still go against it because of all of that. So I really hope that the pediatricians also, like, kind of like work hand in hand, though. That's really amazing, though. And you continue to write. When do you think your new book is going to be out?
So my goal is, I've just started it. I just signed the contract about 3 weeks ago. I just
Oh,
started
cool.
writing it, and the goal is to have it out by August of next year, at least to
Hmm.
have it completed. Then there's probably a little lag before it's actually published, but I'd like to see it out by the fall of 2025.
That is amazing. I really like that. Congratulations. I'm looking forward to reading it, though.
Thank you.
And as far as like practicality, like for parents, I know you when you talked about a play club, it reminded me of this place in New York City. It's on Governor's Island, and it's
Yeah.
called the Yard. Do you know about the Yard?
Yes, I do. Yeah, adventure playgrounds
Mm-hmm.
are. I wish that every community had an adventure playground within walking distance of every
Yes.
kid. So they're really not expensive to build. I mean, another
Mm-mm.
term for them is junk playground.
Mm-hmm.
You've got old
Yes.
tires, you've got old stuff. Kids love that stuff. Kids used to, when I was a kid, we used to play in the town dump because there was all those fascinating things to play with. It was a little dangerous, but we learned to be careful by playing there. So basically, this is kind of a safe dump for kids to play in,
Mm-hmm.
and kids love it. And in most adventure playgrounds, I think this is true in the one on Governor's Island too. The parents are not allowed in. There's a fence around it,
Correct.
not to keep the kids in, but to keep the parents out. So
Yes.
it recognizes the point that parents tend to interfere with children's play, and
Mm-hmm.
children need to get away from their parents when they're
We
playing.
do.
Even
Mm-hmm.
little children do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and because there's an adult there who knows how to be present without interfering,
Mm-hmm.
parents think it's safe enough for their kids. So not so much in the United States, but in Europe, parents leave their kids off, or the kids get there on their own, and parents don't feel like they have to hang around. In the United States, it's
Mm-hmm.
very hard to get parents not to hang around because
Yes.
even if they're not allowed in there, they want to be there and available if something happens.
It's,
They're all
mm-hmm.
over anxious and so on. But yeah, they're a great development, and it's too bad there are so few of them.
Yes, I wish there was like more yeah, definitely more of that. Because we had the opportunity to visit twice, and my oldest son was really like, like the risky play was big. He was like going down certain slides. He was like, I just don't know if he can do it. He told me that later, but I ended up taking a workshop there where I was part of what I was a
Uh,
play worker. And one of the exercises that we did was about risky or just play ourselves. And honestly, I remember when Yoni said, okay, we'll go out and play. Let's see what comes up for you. And I stood there like I was like, I'm not really sure what to do, but I was very conditioned to expect a certain outcome.
uh-huh.
Like I didn't do it just for the sake of playing. Like expecting the outcome was hard
Yeah.
for me to let go. How can people find you right now?
But giving money to certain nonprofit
Yes,
organizations
yes.
like Let Grow, that is working on these kinds of things, like the Alliance for Self-Directed Education,
Yes.
which is working on providing community for people who are brave enough to do self-directed education with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think one way to look at this is so the kind of one hopeful development that it would be great if parents got more involved in is libraries becoming interested in play at the library. I did
Mm-hmm.
a survey a few years ago. It was actually just before COVID, with two librarians of libraries in the United States to look at how many libraries offer play of one sort or another at the library. And there are some libraries that actually have play, very few actually have play similar to Play Club at schools, really free play at the
Mm-hmm.
library at certain hours of the week. One library in particular, that's the library that the two librarians who worked with me on this survey are
Okay.
directors of. But there's also a library in Madison, Wisconsin that offers play in the park, and there are many libraries, a growing number, that have maker spaces in the library. So this is the opportunity to play
Mm-hmm.
with technical equipment like 3D
Mm-hmm.
printers and laser cutters and all this stuff that kids are often very fascinated with, and they can just play with it. The librarians often don't even know how the stuff works. The kids figure it out,
Yes.
and of course adults can use it too. But often the kids are the ones who figure it out more than the adults. And when there's exchanges, it's often the kids teaching the adults as much as the other way around. So this is an opportunity for play at the library, and many librarians understand that they should just let the kids fiddle with it. I mean, the whole idea of maker spaces is kind of to be creative. You're not necessarily there to create. You're not necessarily there with a goal-directed
Mm-hmm.
activity, though you might be. But you're there, to kind of fiddle around with this stuff and look at its potentials and try it out, and then maybe you'll try to make something with it. But there's no pressure to, there's nobody saying, so what are you going to make now? That kind of
Yes.
spoils it in a way. So that's happening at libraries. And I think that if people get onto their library board or the Friends of the Library committee, they could help influence libraries to move in this direction, to move even
Mm-hmm.
farther in this direction. There are also a lot of libraries these days that have hangout places for teens, primarily after school, but for kids who are homeschooled, unschooled, they can be there anytime, where they can play games on their computers, they can talk, they can be, like teenagers need to
Mm-hmm.
just kind of have a place to hang out with other teenagers where there's no adult interfering with them. And so these are rooms in many libraries where teens can do that. So these are some very hopeful developments, and those are the
Yeah.
kinds of things that would be good to get involved with. The project with pediatricians that I'm involved in, I'm doing that in conjunction with an organization called the National Institute for Play,
Okay.
and that's another nonprofit organization that is becoming increasingly active in promoting play, both for kids and
Mm-hmm.
adults. And
Yes.
so a donation to that, especially if it's earmarked to the pediatrics project, could be a way that parents could help promote some of what's going on.
Yeah, we definitely need a lot of more exposure, but but I think from a personal perspective, it really changed our life. It felt so simple to add bring more play into our home, but it was difficult for me to like open myself up back to that and enjoy the moment with my children. But luckily, our unschooling journey has evolved, and we're continuously working on that. So thank you so much for your work, for all of that you have done. I don't think every time someone starts with like, how do I start to unschool, how do I begin this journey, and people recommend literature, books, podcasts, whatnot, I don't think your book is not ever mentioned. Like, it's always one of like the top five that it's mentioned on that. So a lot of impact in all of us who have begun this journey, at different times, and for the people that are coming ahead. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Do you have any words for parents, or for parents who find it difficult to play?
Well, so I guess the point I would want to make is the more important thing than whether the parent finds it difficult to play is, are you finding opportunities for a child to play? And not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily to play with you. Children need to play with other kids, and that's
Definitely.
perhaps the biggest challenge in today's world.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is valuable, of course, for adults to have a playful attitude, and it makes you a better parent if you have a playful attitude. Among other things, you worry less.
Yeah.
You're more open. You're more. One way to think about playfulness. When I talk about adults, I don't talk so much about play as playfulness, having a playful attitude about whatever
Mm-hmm.
you're doing. And you could have a playful attitude about your work, how you're making a living. You could have a playful attitude about your kids, about your
Mm-hmm.
housework. And if you can maintain that playful attitude, it's more fun, and it's also more fun for those who you're associating with. They don't see a
Definitely.
nervous, worried person. They see a person who's having fun. And so
Mm-hmm.
the question of how can you sort of direct your own activities, think about your own activities, reframe your way of thinking about those activities in a way that you think of them as play and playful rather than as, oh, this burdensome thing I've got to do. So that's, I think, the trick for adults. And
Mm-hmm.
there's actually a book I recommend to adults who want to be more playful. It's a book by Bernie DeKoven, who died a few years ago, called The Playful Path, in which it's a very funny book and fun to read, in which he really describes how you can just take your life as it is. You don't really have to change anything, but ways to just change your attitude about what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
so that you're doing it now in a more playful way. You're less likely to be thinking about catastrophes that could happen, but are unlikely to happen, and more likely to just really enjoy the moment as you're going along. And I also think it's important to structure your day so that
Yeah.
every day you've got things structured into it that you know are going to be fun for you. Don't spend all your time doing the things that you feel obliged to do. Spend some time
Mm-hmm.
doing things that are fun for you. I do vegetable gardening. I go out bicycling every day. I kayak in the backyard. I do a whole lot of things that are good for me because they're exercise that get me outdoors. But they're also, I
Mm-hmm.
choose those things because for me they're play. They're a source of fun, and it makes every day uplifting to be spending a fair amount of my time, roughly about 2 hours a day, on those outdoor things that I just really enjoy.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Gray. For anyone out there, we're going to put all the links of the organizations that you mentioned, as well as the books and all of that for you guys to look. And thank you so much for being here. We look forward for your upcoming book. And for anyone out there, please remember that your time is precious. I hope you're making it count. Thank you so much, Dr. Gray.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for tuning in to the Unschooling Lifestyle podcast today. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to help you on your unschooling journey. If you're ready to take the next step in crafting your own version of the unschooling lifestyle, we invite you to join our email list for exclusive content and updates, or consider connecting with us for personalized one-on-one coaching. Remember, you have the power to create a learning environment that truly resonates with your family's values and aspirations. Until next time, please remember that your time is precious. I hope you're making it count.